Hi, I'm Trip Babbitt, host of the Mind Your Noodles podcast, and now with a name change called The Effective Executive. So I've talked about this. I've talked to some people who listen to this podcast, and I ultimately made the decision to change the name of the podcast to The Effective Executive. And I'm actually going to make this a separate season, if you will. So this will be episode 5 of season 2, meaning I'm backdating this to September 14th with being an effective executive as season 2, episode 1. And I've been wrestling with whether to change it or not. The Minor Noodles podcast was really focused on neuroscience, something I wanted to learn a lot more about and have been studying over the past 3 to 4 years. And I think these things start to merge together. And so let's talk about that because I've had some concerns. When I did talk to some folks that listened to the podcast, they were like, well, I'm not really an executive. And I am targeting, veteran, new, and aspiring executives and executive teams. But folks anywhere in an organization will benefit from the content of this podcast. It'll with the effective executive, it's going to be much broader. We're going to talk about broader things, different guests that will be on the show that are either partners of mine or maybe can uh, shed some light on what it means to be an effective executive, at least with the operational definition that I'm using. And I think these are the, important in order to allow some longevity associated with this podcast, a broader umbrella of things, but all focused on becoming an effective executive. So, what's going to be in it? Well, foundationally, I've already put out the uh, executive education program uh, where I'm teaching basically synthetic thinking, giving you a method. We have neuroscience woven into that program, and that being the foundation that we're building then leads to the knowledge that you need in order to construct an aim. And I'm working with a partner right now in order to build that component. And I think this will uh, have not only an addition to the executive education program, but also to the podcast itself, some of the things that we'll talk about in association with things like storytelling and internal communications, things of that sort. How are you going to get people to even remember what your aim or purpose is of your organization, which is a difficult prospect for most organizations. I rarely find an organization where I can go around the company and say, okay, what's your mission? What's your vision? What are your values in your organization? What's your organizational story? It's just doesn't happen very often. So I think that there's some improvement that can be done there and looking at it differently. And then from there, I mean, be jumping around a little bit, but going back into things like that I've talked about, I believe are leverage points in a system are how you go about making decisions, how if your organization is innovating, if your organization is using data in a way that's helpful, where you can get to wisdom in an organization, and then the customer in design. So all of these things will be things we'll talk about, and I may add things as I go, but to date, I found that decision making, innovation, executive data analytics, customer and organizational design are the leverage points for your organization. Now, this will also mean some website changes. So, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to wind up having one website. So when I started, I had something called the 95 method. 95% of your performance come from the system that you work in, 5% attributable only to the individual or special events and causes. And that was already built before I even started the podcast. And the podcast, like I said, was oriented towards learning about neuroscience, having some folks on, and then I started to merge the two not only the thinking that's coming out of neuroscience and from the 95 method together. And so now I want to complete that transition by having the one website. I don't plan on any color scheme changes or any of that stuff, but you will see website changes over the next few weeks. And you will have also a new website name, but don't worry about that right now. You still can go to mynearnoodles.com and get to the content that you want. I still have that domain. The 95 method then will eventually point to the new domain, and I'll release that in the next couple of weeks or so. But I've already updated things like YouTube. I have the Effective Executive. I haven't moved all the videos over to it yet. I plan on doing that in the next week or so. And then we'll also have a Twitter channel for it and things of that sort. But that's where I'm going with this. I've talked about this over a period of weeks now, and I think it's just time to pull the trigger and move on with it. And I think that in order for me to grow, I need that broader umbrella, and the method needs it. But the focus will still be on method, and that actually leads to this week's episode, which is I want to talk about what people are calling the top 10 leadership competencies. And I've read an article by Dr. Ronald Riggio, I'm probably badgering the name, that was written probably 6 years ago, but has a lot of people that have read it, and I like kind of what he says and how he's broken things out about what the leadership competencies are. Boy, I can't say that. But those 10 things are social intelligence, interpersonal skills, and yeah, I'm scrolling because I'm re-looking at the article, and I'll put a link to this obviously in the show notes. But emotional skills, intelligence, prudence, courage, conflict management, decision making, political skills, influence skills, and 10, the last one is area expertise or competence, which is interesting to me that he called that competence on its own as a subset of competency. Regardless, most of these things on there, as I walk through them, social intelligence. I mean that. Let's go back to our first episode of this second season, being an effective executive, where I talked about you can either be efficient or you can be effective. And an efficient executive is someone who does things right. And an effective one is doing the right things. And they are two different things. And that's why calling this podcast The Effective Executive gets to the core of that. Now, you can't become, in my mind, in my operational definition, an effective executive unless you understand synthetic thinking and understand your organization looking through those lenses. This gets to the education program, looking through a customer lens, looking through your thinking lens that you have in your organization. How do you think, and how have you put things together based on that thinking? So that's this foundational piece. But let's just kind of walk through the 10 things that I just mentioned. Social intelligence, efficiency. That's, it doesn't guarantee that you're working on the right things, but that you're able to communicate in a more effective way or a more efficient way to employees. Interpersonal skills. Again, this is a method of efficiency. This is not making sure that you're doing the right things or working on the right things. It's doing things right. And emotional skills and intelligence. Again, this is something associated with efficiency and not effectiveness. We look at prudence. And in here he writes, prudence is one of Aristotle's cardinal virtues. A synonym is wisdom, but it comes from being able to see others' perspectives and through being open to and considering others' points of view. Now, I think this goes into becoming effective, but again, this is something that has to do with efficiency. Courage, a second cardinal virtue, apparently from Aristotle, is courage or fortitude, and this is having the courage to take calculated risks. And this is something that's built into being an effective executive. Conflict management, again, this is all about efficiency. Decision making. Now, that's one of the things that I believe is a leverage point, and that you need a method to be an effective decision maker. And I don't see it very often in organizations. I see sometimes very effective decisions being made, but is it optimal? Is it a learning method, or do you make a decision and move on? So decision making is definitely one of what I would consider to be something that you have to, as part of being an effective executive. Political skills, again, this has to do with efficiency. Getting all the people on board. It's built into the methods, all of these kind of efficiency things, but not to the degree that you're getting them as standalones today. In other words, all these people that are talking about leadership, and that's most of the people out there talk very little about method. They're inspiring and they're, emotional intelligence and all those types of things, but they don't provide you methods in order to improve your organization. And that's the focus of this podcast. Influence skills, can you influence decisions and things of that sort? Again, efficiency. And then it's interesting to me, again, that the 10th thing is area expertise or competence. And this is really what I want to build in this podcast, the effective executive, and what you're going to get from the YouTube channels and the executive education program is building competence, giving you method to do things. So hopefully that helps a little bit about some of the differences and the same things. I just will not, I'm not saying leadership is not important. It is very important. But if you have leadership skills and you're great politically and you can influence things, but you don't create things that make your organization or yourself more effective, then I think you're missing the boat. And when I'm talking about effective, I'm talking about creating value in association with what value you want to create. Now, I don't think that you can do an aim construction. I don't think that you can determine what the right things to do are until you look at your organization synthetically, and most executives are not built that way. Therefore, this is a reason for the executive education program and all of these podcasts is to focus on method and how do we create value. And I can't tell you what it is, but I can walk you through some things that will help you reveal to you as an executive or your executive team what are the types of things that you want to focus on that create value for your customers, for society as a whole, things of that sort. And those are the things that you need to consider, but you can't do it until you understand synthetic thinking. And most of you are going to be, 99% of you are analytical thinkers, or 100% of you, I would think it would be fair to say, or 99.999% of you are going to be in organizations that are built analytically and not synthetically. So this is why I think executives need to back up. You need new skills if you're new to being an executive. If you're aspiring to be an executive, you need to develop these skills. If you're a veteran executive, this will give you some fresh thinking for your organization in order to build something maybe a little bit different, but in my opinion, a lot better than the way that you're going about things now, or certainly with a lot more consciousness about why you've built the things that you have and how that's affecting customers in that. So that's this week. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to get one thing in here on give you some content material other than some of the podcast changes that are coming up. I think you'll like them, whether you're just someone from the front line that doesn't really aspire to be an executive. You still have to influence, you still have to understand, and the better you understand, the better employee you are, the synthetic thinking portion and what your executives in your organization need to be able to do in order to make your organization effective, but also that executive themselves effective. So that's it for this week. You can reach me at trip@the95method.com or trip@mindyournoodles.com if you have comments about any of the changes. Like them, don't like them. I just felt it was time to pull the trigger and move on. So starting new season, this would be episode 5. I still will continue to put in the episodes, the number that I'm at. This would have been the 79th episode that I've done since starting Mind Your Noodles and now merging into the Effective Executive. Thank you.